Hi, I'm Catherine Llewellyn, the host of the podcast. You can find out all about Truth and Transcendence on truthandtranscendence.com. And you can find out all about me on beingspace.world, where you will find my online coaching offering as well as my UK-based workshops. The Freedom of Spirit workshop for liberation and empowerment, the Pellower Radical Shift in Consciousness workshop for spiritual expansion, and transformational coaching for exploring the mind-body-spirit connection on the expansive path. You can also support the podcast by actually making a donation. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to Truth and Transcendence. You can find all our episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. Today, I'm excited to welcome special guest Guy Morris, who's come along to talk about openness to change, which is something he's explored a lot. And just to give a snippet of Guy's history, retired from a 38-year executive career with Fortune 100 software, high-tech, and global energy. He's also been a published songwriter for Disney Records, a patented inventor, a Coast Guard charter captain, an adventurer, and now a self-published author of thrillers inspired by true stories, actual technologies, global politics, and history. His books have been recommended by Kirkis and awarded BookTrib's Best 25 Books of 2021, Readers' Favourite Gold and Silver Awards, finalist for the Ian Book of the Year, and semi-finalist for Cinematic Book. And Guy is also working on a new book that has a strong spiritual aspect to it, which I hope he's going to talk about during the conversation. So, Guy, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Catherine, so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Fantastic. So, when we talked about openness to change before, this was clearly something very, very familiar to you. Now, I think these days, everybody knows that being open to change is, in quotes, a good idea. We all know that in theory. Some of us have connected to it in our own actual experience. So if you look back in your life, can you remember when you first engaged with openness to change? Not just the idea of it, but the actual feeling of it.
Practice of it.
Yeah.
The moment I left home for good at age 15.
That is early to leave home for good.
I had been a runaway at age 13. I was gone for several months before I was encouraged by my older brother to go home. I finished my GED as an American minimum requirement efficiency to get a high school diploma, but it's not a full diploma. It basically says you've done a minimum number of credits. But it was the minimum I could get. And with that in hand at age 15, I packed a little tiny knapsack. I had a guitar that I bought in Tijuana, so I put that in a little cardboard box. And I walked a few miles to a freeway and hitchhiked through the desert. I got caught in the middle of the desert and left there for several hours in 115-degree heat. Thought I was going to die until somebody picked me up and took me all the way to my destination, which was a Christian commune in Tucson, Arizona. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I knocked on their door, and they were too tired to argue with me, so they let me in.
And you were a kid, you know, if they'd left you outside.
So a 15-year-old kid basically shows up at their door at 3 a.m. and says, I'd like to stay here.
Wow. And how did you hear about these people?
I had heard about them from some other group in Huntington Beach. And I knew I needed to leave home. And we were extremely poor. And so there's no hope for me to go to any sort of college or get a real career. And the abuse and the atmosphere at home was so destructive that I felt that I had, while leaving posed challenges to my survival, I had already convinced myself I could survive on my own at age 13. It wasn't easy, wasn't pleasant at times, but it put me in control of my own destiny.
Yeah.
And there was a sense of, I need to take control of my own destiny back. And I hadn't felt in control of my destiny for 15 years. I hadn't felt control of my daily activities. I hadn't felt the control of sanity. Life was constantly, daily abusive and insane. And this was a way of saying, I may die, but that's just a choice of how I die.
Yes, I'll die free as opposed
I'll die free.
trap. I'm
I
so
had no idea what to do. I had no idea how to make a living for myself. I had no idea where I was going to go after the commune. I had no idea anything else. It was all completely blank slate. It was just, it starts by escaping.
yeah. So it sounds like you felt the home environment was more dangerous than whatever you might be risking by leaving the home environment.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I probably can't go into some of the details of that. Because that's really the source of a lot of my traumas, and it's hard to talk about without my therapist. But what I can say is that it permeated almost everything in every level, from sexual to violence to drug abuse, alcohol abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, and it was so consuming that, as I said, the only other alternative I could think of was, if I go and I die, then at least I'm going to die on my own. The only hesitation I had was I had a younger brother, and I knew that if I left, that I was getting the brunt of it, and since I left, he would get the brunt of it. Fortunately, and I could never have envisioned this, I think my leaving must have done something to my mother, because she finally she let my brother go live with his father, our father, for the last few years of his high school. So he had about 6 years of living with my dad that I never had. So he still was traumatized, and he's been traumatized to this day, and he's had all kinds of issues and troubles, but that was his path to at least a path where he could build a life.
Yes.
And so I felt bad about that, but there was nothing I could do by staying there that was going to help him.
Yeah, you were a child. What could you do? And I think children often do take too much responsibility onto themselves for the environment they find themselves in, really, and comes from a place of love, but also we aren't able to rescue everybody else when we're a child. I'm so sorry that you had to experience that as a child. That's
Well, I have to be honest and say I am too, but over the years, I think it's planted a seed in me that I can't blame anybody else. I have to take responsibility, and that the only way I was going to survive is if I did everything I could to put my past behind me and not let my past to poison my future. And I've accomplished a lot in spite of that. And I think part of it was that determination to take control when control really felt that is terrifying, just absolutely terrifying. But to do it. And I think that then led me into probably getting married too early, for sure, but led me to college, and that led me into taking enormous risks to get a grad school scholarship. That led me to great careers where I took risks all the time. My sailing career where I took risks all the time. It led me to the point where fear was not something to stop me. It was something that I had to break through. And I was definitely afraid my entire life, but I didn't want that to define me. I didn't want I wanted to escape my past and every possible imaginable way, including my nightmares and dreams. And that's still progress. It's still something in process. But it was a stage step, one step at a time. You walk 1,000 miles, one step at a time.
But it sounds like you've done quite a lot of healing, but that you're still aware of the fact that there's always healing left for us to do. Is that a fair way to describe it?
When I was, when I was in my mid-50s, I had a kind of an emotional collapse, and I've never really had one. I've always been the rock, right? Because I had to be. You know, everybody had to, I had to been myself. I couldn't have been anybody else. Breaking down emotionally, mentally was just not something I would allow myself to do, but I did. And I took, my older brother was passing away, and he had experienced some of what I had experienced. And he called me up and said, asked me some very personal questions. And he had been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress. Now, post-traumatic stress comes from an incident that traumatizes you to the extent where it's difficult for you to recouple the emotions and the memories. And so we wind up trying to push the memories aside, but the emotions stay, and that's how you get triggered. Complex post-traumatic stress is when somebody's going through traumatic experiences on a regular, frequent basis over a long period of time. They say that it actually rewires your brain. And so he came in and mentioned this, and when I looked it up, I thought, well, that doesn't make sense. I'm successful. I'm gregarious. I'm a happy person. I'm a creative person. That can't be me. But when I started looking at all the problems I had in life, including multiple levels of addiction and emotional issues and social issues and and just frequent nightmares and frequent depression and hyperanxiety and all of these things that I tried to ignore and just push myself past because I had to, I realized formed a pattern. And I started seeing a therapist and realized I had complex post-traumatic stress and that there really is no cure for something like that. It's something you have to learn to live with and work around. Some people are crippled physically. This is a crippling emotional disease. And you can survive and you can live a good life, but you have to accept the fact that that's it. That's part of who you are, and deal with it on a regular, frequent basis. And sometimes I've gotten to the point where I'm pretty good most of the time now. I have to admit that all of the terrifying consequences that are happening as a result of our last election in America, those are causing me a lot of anxieties, and that's triggering me a lot. So I'm having to deal with it more these days than I have for a while because of that external factor. But it's something that I have to be aware of so that I'm not just reacting to it. I have to just be aware of, okay, this is what's happening. I've now know this is what's going on inside. This is what I need to do to reconnect, to recalm. And I can go through I can be aware of what those triggers are, and I can manage them more proactively. And again, that when I first left home, I didn't want my past to define my future. Part of that is learning how to manage this.
Mm. So that sounds like you've developed quite a high level of self-awareness and understanding of the anatomy of, you call it an illness. I think you call it an illness. And to me, it sounds like a wounding, just, it's like a wounding that sometimes pains you and sometimes doesn't pain you, but I'm quite impressed by the fact that you, at the age of 15, were able to find out about this Christian community, find out where it was, and actually get there and get in. Because that sounds to me, given what you said about the background you came from, that sounds like a really intelligent choice. Did it turn out to be an intelligent choice?
Yes and no. It was a very intelligent choice in the fact that it got me away from home, got me into a community that's that was immersed in, it was almost otherworldly for me, in terms of the values and the way that people treated each other and the way that people cooperated and the way that people wanted to. There was also a discipline. Okay, now's our Bible study time. Now's our prayer time. Now we go work and, we go do these works and jobs. And it was a level of discipline I had never experienced in my life. And it was a tight community. You were living in a dorm room, with a bunch of other guys. I was so damaged at that point from these injuries that I could only stay for a few months. I felt so out of place. I felt like the proverbial fish out of water. I didn't belong to these people. These were all basically good people. I was a street rat. And for the first few years, I left the commune, but I stayed attending that church for several years. And for the first couple of years, I had been a street kid, so my nickname became the Punk. And even among it was an affectionate name, but that was sort of indicative of how outside of the norm I was compared to everybody else there. And so that kind of became a pattern for my life as well. I was never the norm.
Yeah. And it sounds.
I never fit in 100% anywhere. Even the boardroom. I would be in the boardroom, and here would be guys who went to Harvard and Yale and who grew up with wealthy families, who got inheritances of hundreds of millions and invested them to make billions. And I was the poor street kid who never, ever, they would talk about their families and their vacation homes. And, I never talked about my family. I never talked about where I went to school. I never talked about any of that. I never identified with any of that. So my entire life has been feeling like I didn't quite belong, but I was going to fake it. And I was good at faking it. I was actually really good at getting the work done. Now, my entire life growing up, I had been told repeatedly, almost daily, I was stupid, I was worthless. My best hope in life was to go to join a trade union and learn to be a carpenter or a bricklayer or something like that. I was functionally illiterate when I got married, when I left home. When I entered college, I was still functionally illiterate. And it was horrendously hard to build up my reading skills and my scholastic skills, my study skills enough to keep up. When I finally was able to catch up a little bit, I started moving faster ahead, and it started getting faster and faster. I wound up graduating with multiple degrees. I got a full scholarship to graduate school in Arizona, which is where I was living at the time. I was accepted into the Harvard MBA program. I was given a part-time job while I went to school at IBM to help them start up their new facility in Tucson. And all of that because I had developed a macroeconomic model. This is a very complex model with hundreds of algorithms and just reams and reams and reams of data. And the algorithms basically work to predict the future economy, what the interest rate's going to be, the unemployment, the economy. Very important at the time because all of the economic models were extremely inaccurate and volatile. And I had a theory of why that was. And I argued with my dean of the business college, who was one of my professors, over and over. I was his favorite irritant. I would ask so many questions. I was given a limit of 3 questions per class. Anything else, I had to come do an after class session with him because I was just leaping, frogging ahead of everybody else and asking all kinds of advanced questions. I was his biggest pain in the butt. But I made him promise that if I could beat no, we had to build this macro model as part of our grade, and it was a bell curve grade. So whoever got the closest to being correct got the best grade. And I got him to agree. I just think by wearing him down, that if I could beat everybody in the school, he would promote me for a scholarship, because I really wanted to go to get a grad school. I wanted to get my master's, but I didn't have any more money. I had given a gift from somebody to go back to college, which was the biggest gift anybody has ever given me. But it was gone, and I had to do it on my own at that point. So I got my scholarship. I got everything I wanted. And it actually changed everybody in the builds economic models to this day, because I had developed the first algorithms to connect the productivity of technology to the outcome in the economy. I could make a connection to that. So it was pretty influential through the late 70s, 80s, and 90s, when technology just boomed. It meant more accurate forecasts, and that put me on the map.
And did it have a name, this model, that someone might recognize?
No, because it's been the basic algorithms have been absorbed by the Federal Reserve and a bunch of other banks, and then they continue to innovate on those. And it was just my graduate thesis.
Right.
It was my graduate thesis, and it made an influence. I invited to talk to people at the Federal Reserve. I was invited to talk to people at DARPA, because the model itself had implications in how we would build later on, how we were starting to try and build artificial intelligence or intelligence systems.
Right.
And so I got involved in intelligence systems on and off throughout my career, which led to some of my novels and other things. But it was the point in time, and yet there was a part of my brain that still said, well, you got lucky. You're not smart. You just got lucky. Don't tell anybody. Don't reveal the secret. You're not that intelligent. You just work hard because you have to, because you don't have daddy's money, and you just got lucky. And it still took another 10 or 15, probably another 10 years before somebody sat me down and actually made me do IQ tests. And even with those results, I was a little bit hesitant to believe them. And it took many more years before I realized that what I was feeling was that PTSD emotional response to anything that would give me a sense of pride.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds to me like you came into changing your life at the age of 15, very, very open to changing it, because you really, really were completely wanting to change it. And I think and you came through that, and you've flourished, and you've done some extraordinary things with it. And when I hear that, I kind of compare it to, often when people are thinking about change, they go, yeah, I'm open to change, but they're kind of open to change, maybe. And when you're kind of open to change, you're not going to get the same outcome as when you're really open to change.
I was desperate for change.
Yeah.
I wanted my life to be anything than what it was the first 15 years, both from a poverty perspective, from an education perspective, everything. I used to watch TV and movies, and it took me a long time before I realized that's fantasy too. But there was a part of me that said, well, it happened to him. Why not me? What is it about me that life has to crap on? Why can't I do something else? Why can't it be different? And the only tool I had was hard work. And obsessively hard, 16-hour, 18-hour days off for almost 40 years, 6-7 days a week. I have a very dysfunctional relationship with leisure. If I relax and watch TV or read a book or go just sit by a pool, within a half hour, an hour, I feel like ants are just crawling up my skin. My brain is going up 1,000 miles an hour, and I got to go do something with it. And so it became it went from I'm stupid to, I don't know how to shut it off at times now. And so it's helpful for me to stay busy. And I stay busy with work. I stay busy with research. I stay busy with reading. I stay busy with writing. And even when I retired, I knew that I had to do something that would keep me deeply involved with learning new things and then trying to express it in some way. And so it's the biggest joy that I've had, I think, has been in my retirement career, where I've been able to move away from the pressure and the stress of corporate world, which was not healthy for my PTSD, as it turns out, to the intellectual stimulation without that stress and pressure.
Yeah.
And that's been a joy for me.
Wonderful. And of course, during those years, you learnt a lot and stretched all sorts of faculties that you had and that you can now bring to bear in your writing.
Yeah.
I mean, the question that comes to me, given the way you describe yourself and your life to this point, the question that came up for me, I don't know, maybe about 10 minutes ago, was, so how do you then become somebody who can show up on podcasts and willingly share about all of these experiences and some of the vulnerabilities and difficulties and things? How are you not hiding somewhere, saying, don't ask me any personal questions?
Before I understood that I had PTSD, I couldn't. And even then, when I first started doing podcasts, it was really mainly to promote the books. It wasn't really to promote me. It wasn't really to talk about myself personally. It evolved into that because people kept. Let me put it this way: when I was in my career, it's a very competitive environment out there. There were times when I would take assignments because everybody else who had done it or tried it was asked to do it either said that it couldn't be done or they had failed. So I was constantly putting myself on that bleeding edge. And failure was not an option. So, and then when I would succeed, everybody wanted my job. So I was getting arrows going in. I was getting daggers coming out. It was a very stressful environment, and you could not, on any level, all of the years I was in careers, I was reporting to chief executive officers. I couldn't tell them I'm working through addiction issues. I couldn't tell them I had chronic depression. I couldn't tell them there was no way that you could express any form of weakness or you would have been eaten up. I would have been eaten up, especially somebody like me, where if somebody had decided to attack that weakness before I was prepared to be comfortable with it myself, I spent years living a double life, one at home, one at work, and not knowing how to blend the two.
Very hard.
It's only been the last few years that I've grown comfortable with discussing some levels of what's going on. And as I said, I can't ever talk about before 13. I can only talk about the mistakes and the things that I've experienced that were difficult after 13 because those were of my own making. I hold responsibility for those. I had to take responsibility for those. I had to take responsibility for why I would do stupid things. And so that I've grown to come more comfortable with. But it's only been a couple of years and it's been a growth process.
Yeah. Right. Well done. Congratulations to you, because I think, I think we collectively need to be able to share with each other and witness one another, because that helps us to understand that we're all human and we're all part of the collective. And sometimes people are hurting and sometimes people are not hurting. I had an experience once years ago where there was something going on in my relationship with my partner, and it was like very difficult. And we had a friend, a young man, friend of his, who was staying with us. And this young guy, I think he may have been 10 or 15 years younger than we were. He said, okay, right, you, pointed at me, go and have a bath now. You, said to the guy, go into the garden and just sit and look at the sky, right? I'm going to cook the trout and the vegetables and the supper. Both report back here in half an hour. We both reported back, settled, much as I had the supper, and things were much better from that because he'd grabbed hold of us. Next day I said, how did you do that? Right? You were so young. He said, I grew up in a commune. And in our commune, someone was always having a meltdown about something. So you learned to understand this happens. You learn how to help. You learn how to know when to get out of the way, and you develop the authority to tell people to shut up and get out of the room if you need to. And I was so struck by that. It was, and so I always really appreciate, if someone like you really shares about these things. I feel that's such a gift. I feel very privileged hearing it, and I don't need to hear the details of what happened before 13 because
Well, and to your credit, I can't talk about it with everybody.
Yeah.
You have a unique theme, culture, tone, atmosphere. I'm not sure the right word, but you encourage it, you embrace it, you don't judge it. And so there are still certain people. I couldn't go to any of my old colleagues at Microsoft and talk about these things. I can with some close friends, but not all close friends. So even there, I have to be selective about who I think is going to hear it in the right way. And in part because I tend to be very opinionated, especially with geoeconomics, politics, artificial intelligence, technology issues where I'm expected to have an expertise. And I'm very impatient with people if they want to argue with me. I tell them, I said, you watch, you learn, this because somebody on TV told you. I know it because I built the model. I said, if you want to argue with me, no, I'm not willing to do that. I'm not willing to waste my time listening to your garbage, and then trying to educate you, because it's taken me years to do that. You go do your homework and then you come back to me, son, and then we'll talk.
Yeah.
And so I have a very abrupt, blunt, one guy in business said you had the executive way of communicating displeasure. I said, well, I learned that. I learned that. And actually, I had one CEO once tell me, when early in my career, I was very afraid of conflict, terrified of it, because it always led to bad places. And I remember it was a multi-$100 million deal. And our oil and gas division really wanted to go drill in this one spot in the Gulf of Mexico. And I looked at the whole thing, and I had to make a recommendation. It was my job to review everything with big expenditures and recommend either to the board or the president whether they should approve it. I was the gatekeeper. And as the gatekeeper, some people like to kiss up to me and some people like to demean me, because whatever tool they felt that they had to do to get past me. And in this case, they were so upset, they flew to LA to have a meeting with the chief operating officer, and I was in the room. And they went back and forth about, I had given him all my reasons why I thought it was a bad deal, but I really didn't want to get in a yelling contest with these guys who were senior to me. They were more successful to me. These were presidents of their divisions. I was just the nerd, in the office. And after the meeting, and I didn't really say much. After the meeting, the chief operating officer stopped me. He said, "Guy, I want to talk to you." And he said, "I saw you squirming in your seat. You didn't say a thing. This meeting was all because of what you had to say, and you didn't have anything to say." And I tried to explain that I really didn't want to have a conflict with these guys. He said, I don't give a crap about that. He said, I said, I pay you for your opinion. And if you're not willing to stand up for it when it counts, I'll find somebody else. So I'm going to give you one warning. That's your warning. If you come into my office, you better be willing to stand up and put your, and put your money where your mouth is, and stand up to these guys. And so we did. We had another meeting, and I stood up to them, and they didn't approve the project, and I was hated for that. 20 years later, that same drilling site, that same company that wanted to partner with us, was the deep horizon well that exploded in the Gulf of Mexico. And so I go through my life, and I find these things where I'm the one person in the room that says, something doesn't fit for me. It's this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this doesn't feel right, and these numbers don't add up. And I'm always the one person in the room that says, I don't think so, and have been wrong more often than not. And I'm took me 40 years to learn how to trust that instinct.
Yeah. Wow. Well done. I think you were quite a brave man, Guy.
I never think of myself that way.
No, well, you sound like it to me. And I think, because I think a lot of people with some of the situations that you've had and how that then affected you and, weakened you in certain ways, which meant you've got a certain burden that you're working with and managing as you go through life. I think a lot of people would have just given up or made that into a reason to have a drama, and be
and then all the people who abused me and told me I was stupid and worthless would have won.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're not going to let that happen.
I didn't want them to win.
Yeah.
I mean, it could have been true. I mean, I wasn't willing to say that they weren't right. I just wasn't willing to let them win without a fight.
Yeah. Oh, well, good for you. And I'm glad you did as well, because otherwise you wouldn't have ended up on this show today.
No.
Having this conversation, which I just feel
I'm
like
very grateful for the chances I've gotten. And I'm even a little grateful for some of my failures, because they taught me. I know that I can be arrogant when it comes to my areas of expertise. Outside of that, I'm just still a frightened little right away, willing to trying to figure out how to make life better.
Well, thank you for being so honest about that. So to move on to more the present day, would you share with us something about this new book project you're working on?
Oh yeah, I'm excited about this one. I and scared because it's the third book in a series, and the series is called the Snow Chronicles, and Snow stands for Spynet Online. And the series is based on a true story, and there's all kinds of other true stories baked into the series. I do so much research on my books. It takes me longer to do the research on a book than it does to write the book. One book took me 12 years. Most of my books take 2 or 3. And in the story that started this one was a true story. I had discovered, I'd mentioned earlier, I had worked on various forms of artificial intelligence throughout my career, was one of the early implementers, understood the technologies and where it was going and but this was a number of years ago, before AI was really the word. And I had stumbled upon a very obscure article that said that a program had escaped they named the laboratory, it was an NSA spy lab. So a program had escaped an NSA spy lab and they couldn't find it. And they were looking for anybody who had information to call either this FBI agent or this particular professor at the lab.
Hold on a minute. How does a program escape a lab?
Bingo. I looked at that article. I read it 3 times. I cut it out. I taped it onto my monitor. I looked at it every single day for months, asking that same question. Maybe it was a typo. Maybe they meant to say it was lost. It was stolen. It was broken. It didn't work right. But it was an Associated Press article. And I thought, well, these guys are pretty good at checking their facts. You'd think that would be something that somebody would catch. I couldn't find any other story about it. I looked up every other magazine. I couldn't find anything else. And I finally decided, what if it was true? And I being the nerd that I am, and at the time I was a single parent, so I had to stay home every night, and I didn't have a social life. Not that I had any money for a social life, because of
Well, no, I'm
more.
you had a small social life with a very small.
I had a very small social life of one. And he needed a lot of attention. He very needy. But I would have a lot of time at night, and so I thought, well, maybe I can figure this out. I just stupid kind of, but I was just, I did. I spent several months researching different architectures and different technologies. And I said, well, how would I do it if I were going to do that? Right. So I started saying, okay, Guy, rather than asking the dumb question, just go solve the problem. Right. Go figure out how they would do that. You know technology and you know architecture. You know how to do this stuff. So I spent several months figuring out exactly how they would have to build this kind of program to escape. Now, escape meant several things to me. It meant some form of base level of intelligence or intelligent design. It meant the ability for the program to move itself, which meant replicating files. It meant that it could replicate files to another server. In order for those files to survive, they had to stay hidden, which meant that it had to be able to go through and erase the logs, had somehow to control to erase the logs after it, so they didn't know where it went, so they couldn't follow it. And it came up with all these different things. And then I thought, well, so why would they do that? What were they trying to do with this thing that they designed it that way? And so I thought, I watched a James Bond movie and I thought, well, I'm gonna be Q. I'm Q. I'm the tech Q. So I went around I went to the data center and I walked around and I asked a bunch of questions. So what about this and how, and I came up with all kinds of ideas, just random ideas of how I would make my perfect invisible spy program. If I had an invisible spy program, that's cool. What would I want it to do? And so I came up with a bunch of stuff. And then at the time, I had a friend who was a film producer, an indie film producer. And I went to him and I said, Jack, I think I had this great idea for a movie. And I told him all about this. And he was all excited. And we said, well, what are we going to do? And so we kind of developed the basic frame of who the characters were and what the situations were and all that kind of stuff. And instead of a film script, we said, well, let's do this as a webisode series because this is an internet-based program. Let's do it there. We can pilot the idea, right? We can write some scripts, hire some out-of-work actors, do some shoots, create some digital sets that looked very cool and, Star Trekky and all that kind of stuff. And we produced about 12 episodes, won about 20 awards, got optioned by one of the studios. One of my biggest fan, who wrote to me at least 6 times, was the director of flight operations for NASA Space Center in Houston. And I knew he was somebody special because his alias was Orbit at NASA.gov. It wasn't Guy at NASA or Guy Moores. It was Orbit. And everybody's supposed to know who Orbit is. I didn't know. I found out who he was afterwards, but it was, so I knew this a high up guy in NASA. So I was really excited until 2 FBI agents showed up at my door. They were not excited.
They were not there for coffee.
They were not there for coffee. Now, when they first showed up at my door, I thought my friend Jack was pulling a prank on me. He had gotten a couple of his other actor friends to come to my door and harass me. So I'm just laughing at these guys, and I'm like, no, you're from Jack. I said, well, show me your badges again. And I had to look real close, like, oh, you guys are a real thing. So I invite them in, and of course, I immediately know why they're there. And I hadn't broken any laws. I hadn't hacked anything. I hadn't done anything illegal. So while they were very upset that I had figured out their top secret missing program, I showed them my article that I cut out. I showed them all my worksheets. And I said, you guys were dumb. You let it slip. I figured it out. What are you going to do? Bust me? Because you can't arrest me for being a smartass. I says, I'm pretty sure I can look that one up. I gave them such a hard time. What bothered them was me knowing about their secret. What really bothered them was my snarky attitude. Again, when it's about my expertise, I can be a real jerk. And so I was shoving it in their face and giggling about it practically. During the end of the interview, my wife came home. She pulled me. Now, this is my new wife. We'd only been married for about a year. She pulls me aside. Honey, Why are there two FBI agents in my dining room? And this better be a damn good story. That's when I knew I was in trouble.
You were more scared of your wife than you were of
I was more scared of my wife than I was of the FBI.
sensible man.
So anyway, that was the beginning of this series. So the program that escaped became a major character in the series and has multiple personalities because one of the things it had was deep fake. Now, throughout the series, I deal with AI in weapon systems, espionage, cybersecurity, national defense, a number of other topics that deal with our real geopolitical. So in the book coming up, it's called The Image. The program that escaped is now reaching the point where it's becoming conscious. And so we'll deal with some very deep issues in this one, like a CERN black hole that opens up the fifth dimension, that sends a quantum signal that entangles all of the quantum computers on the planet. Our sentient AI is one of the ones that's going to have to figure out what this really means and how to respond. But we're dealing with some very sensitive issues. I deal with the 2020 election and the Project 2025. I deal with Ukraine and the efforts of Russia to basically bring them to their knees at whatever cost. And there's a spiritual element in all of this because I can't deal with consciousness in a machine unless I'm also dealing with it in humans. And that really kind of brings in this multidimensional aspect of our consciousness that when we think of spirituality, when we think of, and I go through looking at the difference between the falseness of religions and the trueness of faith. Faith is an individual experience that really has a quantum property to it, just like our consciousness does, that connects all possibilities into a single point, reality. And it connects us. We have paranormal experiences and people who a loved one dies and they just know it, right? Where we're connected. There's visions and dreams and all of these other experiences that we have that can't be explained in our three-dimensional plus time or four-dimensional reality. They have an element of a fifth dimension and another essence of life that exists all around us. It's the dark matter, it's the dark energy that exists all around us. And there's a quantum nature of connecting the two. Now, one of the principles of quantum theory is that matter doesn't exist unless it's being observed. Before that, it's a wave. It's not really matter. Well, if there's a fifth dimension, that means there's a consciousness in that fifth dimension observing it. And so sometimes spirituality is our quantum or subconscious connection between our consciousness and external consciousness. And so it's dealing, and part of that then goes into a death experience of one of the characters that reveals a secret that's important to the story. But it got me really connecting with the fact that we're in an extremely volatile time in history. So much so that, and I don't think people realize how extremely volatile and different it is to anything else we've ever experienced. But there's a number of ways that our current generation is so out of line with historical norms that there's a number of prophecies, hundreds of prophecies that have been completed in this one generation alone. And rather than to dealing with that topic in a overly religious way, my geek analytical mind went back to my macroeconomic modeling days and said, I bet I can model this. I bet I can model things like forget the allegories. Let's get down to what are the attributes of what happens, what the outcomes are. What does it say that we should look for? Can I find a correlation to that in modern times and then calculate the probability of that event happening relative to known history, right? When I did that across I built the model. I actually developed the data, put it together. I took only things with high correlations, calculated the probabilities, and calculated the cumulative probability. What's the probability of all these things happening at the same time or within the same generation? That model produced an outcome of 1 point that we were living in a prophetic time frame with a outcome of 1 0.4 trillion to 1. That caught my attention. It's also something I put in the book. Not from a human to decide, but the program, the sentient program, has now decoded this and is essentially warning us that prophecy is not about how God will come to do these things to destroy humanity. Prophecy is a warning of how our own hubris, pride, greed, tribalism will destroy ourselves. Now, this aligns with the prophecy models of the Mayans, the Hopi, and the Hindu. All believe that we go through these cycles of creation and destruction. According to many folks who are deeply religious from the Hindu faith, we're in what's called the Kali Yuga, which is the cycle of destruction that precedes a cycle of rebirth. And so all of these things together are part of the kind of the tone that I'm planning to pull together to basically try to get this whole series is leading people to say what we're facing now, what we're going to face in the near future is going to be difficult. We each have a choice, a personal choice of how to respond to it. That's our own personal spiritual space, as it were. And how, just like I had to decide how to respond in my life to all of the challenges, there's a part of the story that's trying to ask the main characters, how are you going to respond? Right? So it allows me to write a story that has severe difficulties. It's a page. It's like an Indiana Jones meets a James Bond with the savvy of an Elon Musk. It's a very page turner type of story. Very exciting. As I said, all the other books have won awards, so I'm excited about this one. But they're deep topics, and I want to make sure that I've pulled it off, that I've done it well enough, that the message is really coming through, that we are going to face some difficulties. Probably that we're not expecting, and certainly not in our lifetime. We've all lived in a very prosperous, relative peaceful, secure, stable, where we understand. We don't always agree with our government, but we understand how it works and all that kind of stuff. We're moving into a level of corruption at a global level that we've not seen in all of history, and America, unfortunately, is going to be part of that. And as an American, I had to take a step back and say, well, pride of my country is meaningless unless my country is doing something that I'm being worth being proudful for. If it's not, then just as I've had to look at the negative parts of my own self, I have to be honest with who my country is and say that we're not going to be, and it was proven even this last weekend, right? We're not going to be the leader of the free world anymore. And I saw that. I've seen that coming for several years. And so part of the story is this. I'm trying to do a little bit of a Tolstoy, right? I'm trying to capture the essence of a very difficult time in a fictional narrative, bringing out the stresses and the strains of that time frame by but without necessarily naming, the king himself, right? You don't want any lawsuits. But being close enough to the reality, baking in enough real names, real events, real things where it feels plausible and real.
It sounds very powerful, very powerful.
And I'm trying to do that in a way that hopefully leads people towards a personal decision.
Yeah.
Personal. I want people to read the book and then go into their own life and think, what does this mean to me? Well, so I'm very excited about it. It's probably one of my most challenging books because I really had to understand some of the quantum and consciousness issues that I think are hard to express, and I had to find ways to express them.
Well, any idea when it's going to come out?
I'm hoping in May. I'm hoping in May.
In May,
Yeah,
wow.
It's at the second stage of the editor now. They'll probably do some minor reviews when I get that back. Then it'll go to the formatter. As I said, there's a very minor chance. One agent is reading the book, but at this stage, unless they can make me an offer with a traditional deal and a nice advance, and I told him, I said, I'm not willing to do a deal unless it has an advance in international distribution.
Yeah. And otherwise you're self-published, I presume.
Otherwise, it's more profitable for me to do it myself.
Yeah. And people can find this book when it comes out and all your other books and other work on GuyMorrisBooks.com.
GuyMorrisBooks.com. There's images, there's trailers, there's reviews. When I get reviews, I do highlight the reviews on the pages. Each book gets a fact versus fiction page, so that I'm very transparent to say this part is true, this part is true, this part is true. Oh no, that one I made up completely. So because I want people to really get a sense of how much of this is real and how much I'm making up, so that they can decide what they want to do with that information.
Amazing, amazing. Guy, I could quite honestly carry on talking to you for hours, but unfortunately neither of us is able to do that today. So let me ask you a couple of other questions I'd like to ask you before we complete. With all these things that are going on in the world at the moment, you've alluded to some of them. There are a lot of people who are what I like to call trying to be good leaders, trying to be part of this solution, whether it's in their own lives or whether it's running a business or whether they are spiritual leaders, community leaders, political leaders, and a lot of these people are trying to be part of the solution. And some of those people are listening to us right now. Mm-hmm. So is there something you would like to say to those people in relationship to anything we've been talking about today?
The one thing I would constantly tell executives is a good decision is not based on the information we want it. It's based on the information that is. And if the information that is, if the truth, if the facts don't line up to what you want, you have to decide relative to the facts, not the hope for, not the wish. There's a lot of people wishing right now. And we will do better if we face the reality of our situation and make the hard choices now, even if they're politically incorrect, they're unpopular. And one of the things that we're suffering from in the U.S. is we're making horrible decisions because politicians are afraid of being unpopular. And they've lost their moral backbone, their moral spine, and their integrity, and their commitment to the world to do the right thing. And so as a result, we now have a fascist leader in America because they were afraid to really deal with him when they had the chance. The rest of the world is going to need to step up to the fact that, and I think some of the European leaders this weekend admitted the fact that they need to up their defense spending because they can't rely on us as a partner. It's I'm not happy about that. I'm brokenhearted about what's going on. I'm brokenhearted about how we treated Zelensky over the weekend. But that's the fact. This is the new reality in town. And if there's one thing I've learned about my own personal experiences, I only make positive changes if I'm dealing honestly with the reality. And while my changes were not easy, I will never tell anybody at 15 years old, do a little knapsack and hitchhike to a new life. That was a horrendously stupid, risky, dangerous decision I just got lucky from because I'm a little tough kid. But it was a tough decision that was necessary. And none of the other good things would have come if I hadn't made that tough decision. And right now, leaders of the world are going to have some tough decisions to make. We can't keep spending the way we're spending without taxing more to the rich. The rich won't like it, but they're going to have to learn to deal with it. If you're a wealthy corporation or a wealthy individual, you have to face the fact that the world has to operate in certain ways, and doesn't revolve around whether you're satisfied or not. There are people in the world that need taken care of, and we need to step up to do that. Otherwise, we create a really nasty place to live for everybody. And so, yeah, they're very tough decisions, and what I would encourage them is forget your popularity, make the right decision, and history will treat you well.
And I think that piece of advice could apply to anyone, no matter what their scope of influence may be. Yeah. That piece of advice of look at the actual facts rather than looking at how you wish things were,
Yeah.
and then make the best choice you can. And
Best choice you can.
yeah,
And even if it's a tough one, I know more taxes, nobody wants that. But I'd be more than especially when I was in my career, I was making a lot of money. I was paying a lot of, my taxes were more than the average income of Americans. I felt blessed that I could do that and still live well. Maybe because of where I came from. I never drank the Kool-Aid of entitlement. And that's a problem that we have. It's not the cancer around our society in the Western Hemisphere is entitlement. I also believe, and I put this in my books, we really have all of the things we need to solve all of the problems in the world. We have enough physical resources. We have enough human resources. We have enough knowledge and education. We have the technologies. We have the tools. What we don't have is the moral leadership to make the tough choices we need to. And if we can fix that, the cancer of why we keep going wrong in society isn't at the bottom of society, it's at the top. And if we can flip that paradigm of thinking that all of our problems are the poor people doing robberies versus the rich people robbing without guns, you doing it legally through courts and corporations and tax laws and lobbyists and all of these other things, we'll be better off as a society. But we have everything we can. What we're missing is the sense of global community. We're missing the sense of global unity. We're missing the sense that we're all connected together like we are. We're missing the sense that we all are part of this same experience and that there's an injustice to so few having so much at the expense of so many. And that injustice, history has shown us over and over and over again, that imbalance is not sustainable. And we either re-equalize on a rational level with choice, or we have revolutions where people suffer. And I'm afraid that we haven't learned the lessons of our history the way we should have.
Now, Guy, we've talked about a loss a lot today, and we've been very wide-ranging conversation. I don't know about you, I had no idea where it was going to go. So it really has been wide-ranging. Has there been a favourite part of our conversation today for you?
I think this last part. We're really trying to say, what are the things that we can do as individuals or as a society that would make it better? Because we can all find fault on all sides. That won't make it better. And I think that sense of turning negatives into positives is something that I always appreciate, because I've lived with negatives. I've lived my entire life struggling in secret, nobody knowing. The world is going through a similar struggle. Everybody has their daily stuff, but as a society, as a culture, as a community, as a society, as a planet, we're all going through the traumas together. And I don't have a lot of hope that our leaders will get it together in time. That's where I believe in the prophecy aspect of the future. But even there, I find that there's comfort, right? There's comfort in not only in how I respond and how I can maintain my peace during all of that, but there's a cleansing process that I think will have to come anyway, that you can't have a new birth without kind of getting rid of the old stuff that's broke.
Fantastic. And I'm going to ask you for one final thing for the listeners, which is, it's great for the listeners sometimes if they have a simple reflection question of some sort that they can take away with them for the week and contemplate, that will help them, in this case, connect more with genuine, wholehearted openness to change. Do you have a question that you would like to give the listeners that will help them to really connect with or bring out their openness to change?
Find that one thing in your past that you don't want to define your future. Start with one. just to find the one thing in your past that maybe it's a habit, an addiction, a memory, a trauma, family member. Define the one thing in your past that you don't want to define your future. And then decide what you want to be in that place and make that.
Thank you so much, Guy. This has been absolutely fascinating. And I know there's so much more for people to discover about you and in your books. And I'll just repeat again where people can find you, which is guymorrisbooks.com. And thank you, all the listeners. That's all for Truth and Transcendence for today. You can find our other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. Please give us a thumbs up, a 5-star rating, share with your friends, and comment on what we were discussing today. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time. And Guy Morris, thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. It really helps if you give a thumbs up, a 5-star rating, a review, and share with your friends. If you're looking for transformational coaching or an intensive transformational weekend workshop experience, I can help with that. You can actually help the show by making a donation. Until next time, take care.